Miss Q, you know Q Zhang. He's from Shaanxi, and he forgot which county he was from. One year, in the middle of a war, he was captured by a gangster. His two sons, Q Fu and Q Lu, are still young, and his wife Sha, who he continues to marry, is struggling with two orphans. Thankfully, the little work he left behind will keep the mother and son fed. However, in those years, natural disasters and man-made disasters were frequent, and the harvest was not good. In addition, the big family in the village bullied the others, making orphans and widows unable to eat or wear clothes and suffer. Q Zhang had an uncle named Q Shanglian, who tried to swallow some of Q Zhang's properties and repeatedly urged Xiao to remarry. Q Shanglian sold her to a large family in secret, trying to force her out. After Mr. Q settled with the big families, Mr. Xiao was still in the dark, and no one else knew about the plot. There was a man named Wei Ming in the same village, who was a scoundrel and had a grudge against his enemies for many years. Because Xiao was widowed at home, Wei Ming spread rumors and discredited Xiao's reputation in order to vilify his enemies. These rumors were heard by the big family, who hated Xiao's unchastity and told Q Shanglian not to buy Xiao again. The conspiracy against Shanglian and the gossip from outside all spread to Xiao's ears. Xiao's grievances, weeping every day, and his limbs gradually became unwell, so he was no longer sick. Q Fukai was 16 years old. With no clothes to mend, the family hastily married a wife for vengeance. The new daughter-in-law, Zhang, is the daughter of Zhang Qizhen, a talented woman. Since then, all the family affairs have depended on Jiang's food, and the family situation has gradually improved, so Mr. Q Lu Bai has started to study. Wei Mingjian's family life became better, and he was very hateful. Pretending to be close to a vendetta, he often asked him to drink. After being deceived, Wei Ming was seen as a close friend. Your mother is bedridden. She is no longer able to take care of the household. And your brother is sitting and eating and doing nothing, Wei said. You and Hai Hai are the only people who have been doing this all day. Besides, it must cost you a fortune to marry your brother. I thought for you, why don't we split up early? Then it's your brother who is poor, and you who is rich. When Q Fu came home, he and his wife discussed splitting up with his brother, and Zhang scolded him. In a desperate attempt to seduce the enemy, Wei Mingshan went to tell his mother that he wanted to live apart from his family. Xiao was furious and lashed out at him again. Furious, Mr. Q has seen his family's silver and food as other people's things and splashed out. Mr. Wei took the opportunity to gamble again and gradually ran out of food. When Zhang found out, he didn't dare tell his mother-in-law. Soon after, the family suddenly ran out of food, and Xiao asked in shock before he learned of the gambling between the vengeful, the fortunate. Although he was furious, but he couldn't help but score a family and let the vengeful live another life. Luckily, Kang is very good. He cooks for his mother-in-law every day and still serves them as before. After Q Fu separated from his family, he became even less worried and gambled wildly. Within a few months, all the fields were wiped clean. Mother and wife don't know yet. After losing his money, Mr. Q could no longer gamble. He tried to borrow against his wife, but never found anyone willing to borrow. There's a Zhao Yanwang in this county, who's a thief who's missing a net. He's on the side, no one's going to mess with him. He's a local bully, so he wasn't afraid that the bad guy would break his promise and lend him money generously. Haya got the money, and in a few days, he lost it again. I hesitated and tried to repent with Zhao Yanwang. Zhao Yanwang got angry and fearful of Q Fu, so he had to deceive his wife into Zhao's house and hand her over to Zhao Yan. After Wei Mingshan said that, she was very happy, and she rushed to tell the Zhang family that she and Q would be very happy about it. When the King family heard the news, they were furious and immediately brought a lawsuit. Fearful, Xiao Fuk ran away. After her husband tricked her into Zhao Yanwang's house, Zhang learned that she had been sold by her husband. It's a hell of a lot of work. I'm just trying to die. At first, Mr. Zhao was comforting, but Mr. Zhang refused to listen. Zhao Yanwang bullied her again, and Zhang Shishua scolded her. Zhao Yanwang was furious and beat Zhang with a whip. Zhang pulled the hairpin off his head and stabbed himself in the throat. When the crowd rushed to save her, the hairpin had penetrated her throat and blood was pouring out. Zhao was busy wrapping a silk around her neck, hoping to slowly persuade her later to obey him. The next day, an official injunction arrived, and Zhao Yanwang was to be arrested for trial. Zhao Yan cares and rushes to the county house with a big grunt. When the prefect found that Jiang's neck was seriously injured, he ordered the officers to take Zhao Yanwang down and beat him. But they look at each other and they don't dare to do it. County officials had long heard of Zhao's atrocities, and they became more convinced. They were furious, fired from their posts, and ordered their family servants to rush up and beat Zhao to death. The King family carried their daughter home. It was only after the Zhang family's lawsuit that Xiao learned of the evils committed by Zhu Fu. And he cried so hard that he fainted and gradually showed his vision of the next life. Qiu Lu was 15 years old, and he was alone and lost his support. Earlier, Qiu's ex-wife had a daughter called Mama and married Yuan County. He's a tough guy. Every time I visit my mother's home, if my parents give me too little, and she's not satisfied, I'll make my son confront my parents. Mr. Qiu is angry at the daughter and often stays away for years because she is married far away. When Shaw was dying of illness, Wei tried uncomfortably to call her in to provoke a bigger domestic dispute. There was a small vendor who was from the same village as Ms. Qiu, and Mr. Wei asked him to deliver a message to her saying that her stepmother was dying and that it implied that her family was profitable. After a few days, the maiden did bring a young son. When I entered the house, I saw only the second brother serving his sick stepmother in bed. The scene was very bleak. When I felt sad, I asked my brother where Qiu Fu was. Qiu Lu told her all about the family change. After hearing about it, she couldn't say a word of it. After a while, she said, "No adult man in the family is in charge. The occupant bullies to this extent. How dare the thieves to cheat on our property?" After that, I went into the kitchen and cooked the meal on fire. My mother ate the meal before I invited my second brother and my youngest son to eat it together. After eating, he furiously left the house until the county clerk filed a complaint, accusing the gamblers of luring vengeful gamblers and deceiving them of their property. The gamblers heard that they were scared, and they got together and bribed the big lady to sue. The lady took the silver and tried the case. The prefectural officer then arrested several gamblers and beat up the prefectural family members. The prefectural officer did not ask about Tianchan. The bride was angry and took her son to the county. The county guard hated gambling at its most, and the mother-in-law struggled to tell about the suffering of orphans and sick women. And the gamblers' efforts to cheat the fields all spoke with a ferocious and tearful tone. The county guard was also impressed and ordered the county officer to return the property to the enemy and punish him severely to guard against the unworthy son. After the bride came home, the county official had taken the lost fortune back. By the order of the county, detained the gambler again and held him to account. She had been widowed for a long time and told her to go home and work with her brother. Since then, she has lived in her home and raised her stepmother, teaching her second brother to be well organized inside and outside. The stepmother was greatly relieved, and her condition gradually improved. She was entrusted with the management of all household affairs. The village's scoundrels sometimes slightly bullied the enemies. The big lady came to the door with a knife to reason. The scoundrels did not give in. After more than a year, the family still increased every day. She also often bought medicine and food for Zhang. As Qiu Lu grew up, he often asked matchmakers to promote him. Wei Ming went to the trouble of not stopping and said, "The whole family business has gone to her. I'm afraid I won't be back in the future." People believed it, so no one would marry Qiu Lu. There's a man named Fan Ziwan, and he has a famous garden, which is one of the best in Shaanxi. The garden is filled with expensive flowers and grasses planted on either side of the road, which leads to Fan's inner room. Once upon a time, someone didn't know this was Fan's garden, but went all the way to the indoors and happened to meet Fan's family dinner. The Fan family angrily rounded up the man, saying he was a bandit and nearly beat him to death. On Qingming Festival, Qiu Lu returned from Shuli and met Wei Ming. Wei Ming pretended to play with him and gradually led him to the Fan family garden. Mr. Ray had a relationship with the gardener, so the gardener put them in. The two men poked around the pavilion in the garden. A little bit came to a place, a creek, and it went far away. And the water was very strong. The creek straddles a bridge of paintings, flanked by vermilion railings, and opens to a large, red-painted gate. From a distance, I can see the flowers inside the gate. This is Mr. Fan's room. Wei Ming deceived Q Lu and said, "You go in. I'll go to the toilet." Q Lu, convinced, crossed the bridge, entered the red paint gate, came to a courtyard and heard a woman laugh. A woman came out, saw Q Lu, turned around and ran. It was a sudden realization that Q Lu had strayed into someone's house and fled with horror. At the same time, Mr. Fan also came out, calling for his family to chase Q Lu with a rope. So embarrassed was Q Lu that he jumped into the stream in a hurry. When Mr. Fan saw him, he burst into a rage and ordered the servants to rescue him. When Q Lu was dressed in elegant clothes, he asked his servants to change his wet clothes and shoes for him, and dragged him into a pavilion to ask his name. Look at Mr. Fan. He's kind, soft-spoken, and he looks very close. After a little talk, Mr. Fan enters the interior room and then comes out, grinning and holding Q Lu's hand. He pulls him across the bridge and gradually approaches the yard. Q Lu was hesitant to go in. Mr. Fan dragged him into the courtyard and saw a beautiful woman snooping over the grassy area. When they sat down, the girls brought drinks. Q Lu said, "I was ignorant at a young age, and I erroneously entered your house. I beg your forgiveness, and I have done what I expected. I just want you to let me go home early and I'll be grateful." Mr. Fan doesn't listen. Before long, the food was already on the table. Q Lu tweeted again that he was full of wine and food. Mr. Fan pressed him to sit down, laughing and saying, "I have a name for a band. If you can get it up, I'll let you go." Q Lulu promised, and asked him to say yes. "The name is not similar," says Mr. Fan. It took Q Lumo a long time to answer and say, "Yin Sheng is in no mood for anything." Mr. Fan said with a laugh, "There's a real shikong." Q Lu listened and was even more confused. It turns out that Mr. Fan has a daughter, Huanaying, who is beautiful and knows poetry. Mr. Fan wants a good husband for her every day. The night before, Huanaying dreamed of someone saying to herself, "Shi Chong, it's your son-in-law?" Huanaying asked, "Where is it?" The answer is, "Tomorrow it will fall into the water." In the morning, Miss Hui told her parents she felt strange. Q Lu fits the dream of Huanyang, so Mr. Fan invited him into the interior room to be seen by his wife, Huanyang, and her sister-in-law. At this point, Mr. Fan listens to a coincidental couple like Q Lu, saying, "My daughter made this name and hasn't thought up the right sentence for a long time. Now you're up against it. It's fate. I want to marry you, my daughter. I don't have a house in my house. Don't bother your family to welcome you. You can join my house." Grumbling, Mr. Q declined, saying that his mother was sick and in bed, and that he was afraid to venture elsewhere. Mr. Fan told him to go home and discuss it with his family. So they sent a servant with Chu Lu's wet clothes to ride him back. Q Lu came home and told his mother about it. My mother was surprised that it was bad luck. Xiao only realized from this that Wei Ming was very sinister, but he didn't want to take revenge on him because he was in trouble. He just told his son to stop seeing him. A few days later, Mr. Fan had another message sent to Ms. Q. The mother was still afraid to say yes, but the maiden took over and sent to matchmakers to deliver the bride. Before long, Q Lu had joined Mr. Fan. Over a year ago, he got the talent test. He's very talented. Later, when his brother-in-law grew up, he snubbed Q Lu. In a fit of rage, Mr. Q returned to his home with his wife. By this point, the mother was able to walk with the cane. The house in Jiali is spacious and intact. After Q Lu's wife moved in, the servants brought many, and the Q family became a big family. Wei Ming was even more jealous of his enemies when he failed. He bought a Hanu who had escaped from his family, and told him to accuse Lu of being the concealer. When the Qing dynasty was founded, the law punishing the exiles was the most draconian. Qiu Lu was then sentenced to exile and sent abroad. The bribe activities of Mr. Fan only saved Ms. Hua from exile, and all the farmland of Fan Chulu was put into the coffers of the government. Luckily, the mother and daughter stepped forward with the original documents on the separation of family members and defended with the government that the newly added several hectares of fertile land, which were all listed in the name of revenge, were not confiscated until they were not included in the farmland of revenge, and the mother and daughter were able to live in a place. Qiu Lu predicted that he might never come back after being distributed this time, so he wrote down the divorce papers and gave them to his father-in-law's family, and went to the People's Liberation Army on his own. Qiu Lu walked for a few days to Dubai and ate at a guest house. I stumbled upon a beggar staring at himself outside the window, looking a lot like a brother's revenge. Qiu Lu asked, but he was a real pain in the butt. Qiu Lu described what had happened to him, and the brothers were very sad. Qiu Lu untied his underwear, took out a couple of coins, handed them to his brother and told him to go home. Chao Fuk wept and accepted, and the two separated. Qiu Lu was sent to Guangxun to work as a servant under a general's account. Because he was born weak, the general put him in charge of the books and ate with the other servants. The servants asked him about his family, and Qiu Lu spoke in detail. "You're my son," one said in surprise. "You and me." Qiu Zhang was taken by Qiang Ku and initially paid for them. After the gang surrendered to the army, they sold their feud to the swordsmen, who were then stationed outside the camp with their owners. After Qiu Zhangshang recalled the past to Qiu Lu, everyone knew that they were real fathers and sons. Chu Cheng and Qiu Lu cried with their headaches, and people in the room shed tears for them. Meanwhile, Qiu Zhang said angrily, "Where did this slave running come from? Fraudulently accused my son of cheating." He went to cry and told the general what had happened. When the general heard about it, he asked Qiu Lu to become a clerk, and wrote a letter to a prince of the imperial court, telling Qiu Zhang to go to Beijing to file a complaint. After Qiu Zhang entered Beijing and waited for the prince's card to come out, he shouted wrongful accusations and handed over a letter from the general. The prince was very sorry to hear what had happened. He ordered the local officials to file a lawsuit against him, return the family property that had not been put in the official coffers to his enemies, acquitted Qiu Lu, and released him to his home. Qiu Zhang returned to Guanwei, and both father and son enjoyed it. Qiu Lu asked his father if he would ever start a family again in order to redeem his father and return to his hometown. After learning that Qiu Zhang had been married twice but had no children, he was still alone. Qiu Lu presided over the dress and returned to his hometown. At first, Shofu said goodbye to his brother and returned to his hometown, entered the house and kneeled to meet his mother. "If you want to be beaten and punished, you can stay at home first, otherwise your family property is long gone. And there is no place for you to eat here, please leave." The man on his knees cried and said he was willing to be punished. The lady listened, threw the stick to the floor, and said, "The wife salesman is not worth fighting. But you've committed an old crime, and if you do it again, turn yourself in." To the authorities, I sent someone to tell King Chubak that he's coming back. "Who am I from Qiu? You need to tell me." I told Qiu Fu what Zhang said, and deliberately humiliated him. "I'm so ashamed of my good fortune. I'm afraid to go out in the open." Half a year later, the maid was very thoughtful, but always treated him as a servant. Chao Fuk also worked all day without complaining. Sometimes he gets silver, he gets things done, and the vengeance becomes meticulous, and it's clear how much it costs, how much it leaves. When she saw that he had indeed changed, she told her mother to beg Zhang to come back. "I'm afraid I won't be able to save my mother." No, she wouldn't have been so guilty if she had married someone else. She really can't afford not to be angry. Therefore, the eldest daughter led her brother to Jiang's house and pleaded guilty. My parents-in-law saw revenge, and they scolded and cursed. After I ordered him to kneel in front of his parents-in-law, I asked Zhang to meet him. After 3 or 4 invitations in a row, Zhang went into hiding and was firm. When the maiden found her and forced her to be pulled in front of the vengeful, Zhang pointed at the vengeful and yelled at her. "The con of revenge is in the rain. the emperor of the Qing dynasty. Ginger's the one who pulled him up. She asked when Zhang would return, saying, "I used to be blessed by my sister. Now you tell me to go back. How dare I say anything else? But I'm afraid I won't be sold again. Besides, I've lost my love for him. What face does he have to live with this scoundrel? Ask my sister to prepare another room, and I'll return to serve my mother. I'll be satisfied if I'm better than a nun." The lady's busy showing her remorse means he has arranged to pick her up the next day and then said goodbye. The next day, the lady prepared a magnificent card to bring Chang back. My mother had already waited at the door, met Kang and knelt on her knees. Mr. Kang also kneeled on the ground in a hurry, crying loudly. The lady is busy trying to persuade. And then I'm going to have a dinner. And I'm going to celebrate Kang's return. And I'm going to sit on one side of the table. Later, the lady raised her glass and said, "I didn't earn this for myself. I didn't earn anything for my enemies. Now that my brother has repented and my virginity has returned, I will hand over the family's books in full. I come empty. I go back empty." The Shofets heard that the eldest mother gave up. When they got up from their seats, kneeled and begged her not to leave. Soon after, the government gave orders to Qiulu Jiaozu. Within a few days, all the underemployed fields had been returned. Wei Ming was shocked. "I don't know why. They're itchy, but they can't do anything about it." Wei Ming pretended to save the fire, but set fire to Qiulu's house by lighting a straw in secret. A strong wind blew up, and the fire spread quickly, almost wiping out the enemy's house, leaving only 2 or 3 hapless rooms. The whole family had to move into these rooms. Soon after, Qiulu returned home, and the family was reunited, sad and delighted. At first, Mr. Fan received Qiulu's divorce papers and took them to discuss with Ms. Hui. Weeping bitterly, she shredded the paperwork and threw it on the floor. "My father complied with my daughter's wishes and won't force her to remarry. After Qiulu returned, I heard that Huaniying was not married, and I was overjoyed. I hurried to my father-in-law's house. Knowing that his house was in fire, Mr. Fan wanted to keep him. Luckily, the lady had accumulated some silver and took it all out to fix up the house. Fuko accidentally dug out a gold kiln while carrying a shovel to work. At night, he opens it with his brother, only to see a stone-lined gold kiln filled with silver. After receiving the silver, the chauvinist summoned the craftsmen to build the building, which was as magnificent as the ridge. After Qiulu returned, thanking the general for his help in the crisis, he prepared 1,000 silver coins to meet the general and redeem his father. Shofu was willing to go in his place, so he sent a few sturdy servants to accompany him to the border. Chulok has returned to Wenzhou. Soon after, Shofu brought his father back, and the family rejoiced. I'm afraid there's been talk of her trying to take over the family's property, since she lived in her family's home and prevented her son from visiting her. Now that my father has returned, he's going to say goodbye. The brothers couldn't bear it, and the father divided the family into 3 parts, 2 for the son and 1 for the daughter. The siblings were both crying, as the mother said, "If we weren't sisters, we wouldn't be here today." She had to settle down and send someone to ask her son to move in with her parents. Later, the woman is asked, "You're a happer. You're a good friend. Why do you care so much?" The maiden replied, "Only a mother, not a father, only a beast." Who's going to be like that? Qifu and Qiulu cried tears of gratitude when they heard the news. Let the craftsman fix up the house of the lady and make it look like himself. After that, Wei Ming reflected that the more he hurt the enemies, the more he blessed them, and the more he regretted it. And he admired the rich of his enemies, and wanted to be friendly with his family. So he prepared a gift to the enemy's family, citing his congratulations on his return home. After Qifu tried to evict him, Qiu Zhang couldn't bear to give him such gifts as live chicken and wine. The chicken was bound by cloth, but ran into the kitchen and burned to the fire. The chicken went into the stockpile of wood and graves, and the servants didn't care. A moment later, the kitchen's firewood burns and leads to the kitchen. The family panicked and, thankfully, the fire was put out soon after, but everything in the kitchen was reduced to ashes. The Shofu brothers both felt that what Wei Ming had sent was not auspicious. Later, He caught up with his father to live, and Wei brought a sheep as a gift. The family couldn't quit, so they had to tie the sheep to a tree in the yard for a while. At night, a child servant in the house, beaten by another servant, walked indignantly under the tree, and tied the rope of the sheep and hanged himself. Qiu Fu and the Qiu Lu brothers lamented. He treats our family well, so why don't you try to spoil our family? After that, Wei was courageous, but Qiu's brother would never accept the slightest trace of him again, and would rather pay him a generous thank you than the past. Later, when Wei Ming got old, his family was so poor that he had to become a beggar. The family still often took some cloth and grain to Zhou Jitai.
Alright, this story has come to an end. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. Thank you.